I'm so pleased to welcome Dolen and learn more about Balm. This is a historic novel set after the Civil War, mostly in Chicago. It follows her critically acclaimed New York Times best-selling novel, Wench. I want to hear from Dolen more about Madge, Sadie, and Hemp, and her decision to pair someone who communicates with the dead with someone who's a healer. So please join me in welcoming Dolen Perkins-Valdez.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Politics and Prose and Busboys for hosting tonight. I am so happy. Thank you to all my friends and family who are here, to my husband, David, and my daughter, Elena. Elena, can you wave? My future writer. And also a special thanks to my friend Milton Brown. Where are you? Oh, and Tommy Duncan, who were so supportive of tonight to help me get the word out. So I really want to thank all of you. And a special thanks to the Washington Post for that review today. Can you believe that? I could barely sleep last night. I'll just say that. Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit about how I came to the idea for the book, and then I'll read a couple of passages, and then we'll have some questions and answers. I originally thought that this would be my official launch party for the book because, you know, D.C. is my town, and I thought this would be it. And then my publisher scheduled me for the West Coast earlier this week, and then my mom said, oh, no, your official launch party has to be Memphis. So I squeezed my Memphis trip in last weekend, and it was really great to be home. And my homegirl came all the way from Memphis. We went to high school together. She is a super talent. Her name is Leela. And if you could just stand, she's going to be playing the violin tonight. And you have not heard anyone play the violin like this. I have known her since we were 7th grade. And I'm just so happy. I texted her today and I said, I'm so glad you're here. It's just wonderful to have my Memphis peeps. Thank you. And she's a major talent. She's here to inspire me. Okay. So when I finished Wench, or I should say when I finished touring for Wench, my husband kept saying, you know, it's time for you to go back in your cave because I had been on the road for 2 years. And I knew that many of you who had read the book were waiting for a sequel. I know. And so that was on my mind, and I knew, even though my publisher had not said they wanted a sequel, I knew that was kind of at the back of their mind, like maybe you might want to do a sequel. But I wasn't really there emotionally to want to do anything with Lizzie just then. I said I wanted to let Lizzie rest for a while. And, but I was interested in what happened next. I was not quite interested in Lizzie's continued story, but I was interested in the next chapter of history. And a couple things happened towards the end of my tour. One, I read a book called This Republic of Suffering by Drew Gilpin Faust about the devastation of the Civil War and how costly it was. I feel like this is so loud. I'm going to stand back a little bit. It was a very costly war in terms of casualties. 600,000 people died, which was roughly 2% of the population, a huge number, and the equivalent of about 6 million today. So imagine if 6 million people died, all of us would be affected by that. So I was really just thinking about the devastation of that war. And then the second thing that happened was I went to Atlanta, and I was at the Civil War Museum right near the zoo. It's the Atlanta Civil War Encyclorama. Hi. Oh my gosh, that's one of my favorite authors who just came in the room. I don't want to embarrass her though. That's A.J. Verdell. Anyway, so AJ, you just totally made me lose my my heart started pumping. So anyway, so I went to the Civil War Museum, and the night that I went, you know, I was there to talk about Wench. I was not talking about the Civil War per se. I was talking about, you know, parts of what led up to the war, the Fugitive Slave Act, et cetera. And I had a large crowd, and it was a largely, predominantly African-American crowd. And I talked to them about the museum, which is a fantastic museum, and the cyclorama that they have there. And most of them told me that they had never been there. And I said, why is that? And I learned later that they'd actually brought me in to try to attract more African-Americans to the museum. They said that the way that the Civil War was narrated in the South was not their war. The War of the Lost Cause, the Battle of Atlanta, which is what the cyclorama is all about. This idea that the South had lost the war was not their story. And I knew that growing up. I knew that, I grew up in Memphis. I knew that the narrative of the Lost Cause, for my people was, we didn't lose the war. We won the war. What are you talking about? And I knew that that didn't make me any less Southern than anyone else. So when I went back to my desk, what I began to think about is, what are the ways in which all of our narratives converge? I knew that I'm never going to be able to erase the legacy of the Confederate flag. I'm never going to be able to erase the pain of that war for many families. But I was interested in what was it that we had in common from that period. And what I began to think that what we had in common was that the war was a great sacrifice, going back to the Drew Faust book. And that was that, there had been great casualties on both sides, both the North and the South. And then for freedmen and women emerging out of the era of slavery, they were rebuilding their lives and were looking for family members and were trying to figure out how they were going to support themselves. And it was a time of great transition for all of us. So even though I set out to write a Civil War novel, I kept pushing towards 1866, which was the beginning of Reconstruction. And I was really interested in that particular moment. And so I remember I had an early draft that my husband read, and I said, well, what did you think? And this was a very early draft. He said, well, I thought you said it was a Civil War novel. And I said, it is. And he says, there's no battles. There's, And when he said, it takes a Virgo to tell a Gemini that. So I said, you're right. And that was when I realized that it wasn't a Civil War novel per se, but it is a Civil War era novel. So the book is about, the main three characters are Madge, Sadie, and Hemp. Madge moves to Chicago from Tennessee. Chicago is where everyone meets. And the reason I chose Chicago is that I was really interested in a city that was greatly affected by the war. I mean, Chicago obviously profited from the war and sent thousands and thousands of volunteers. But there were no battles in that area. But also Lincoln was from Springfield. And, when he died, his funeral procession went right through the heart of Chicago. And I just thought, this is really interesting. And the other thing is, because Memphis is in my heart, there's a direct, later in history, migration line from Memphis to Chicago. And so I've always felt like some kind of odd, intangible connection to the city. And so I just thought I would set it there. And then, of course, I learned that the entire city burned down in 1871. So I had a hard time in the archives finding anything. So 1866, Madge, Sadie, Hemp. Madge is born in Tennessee. She's born into a family of freedmen and women who get their papers from healing people. And then Sadie ends up there because when the war starts, she's from York, Pennsylvania. Her father gets very worried that she's not going to be able to find a husband because all the men are going off. And so he hastily marries her to a soldier, but he chooses a wealthy one because he's heavily in debt. And so she is involved in this sort of marital transaction. And then the third main character is Hemp, who comes from Kentucky. And I was kind of interested in Kentucky because, as you know, Kentucky was a slave state, but it also never joined the Confederacy. So when Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, that did not free slaves in those states that were not in rebellion. And so the way that Hemp gets his freedom papers is to enlist in the Union Army at Camp Nelson. And the other thing that was kind of interesting to me about Kentucky, and this is how he ends up being named Hemp, is because I'm from the Delta where, cotton was king, but in Kentucky the major crop was hemp. And so I got really deep into what was it, and what did they use it for, and how did they harvest it, and a little bit of that ends up in the book. But I was really fascinated by that. And when he leaves the farm, he is called Horse, by his master, and that's his name. But when he enlists in the Union Army, they ask him for a proper name. And he doesn't want to give anything that's not going to allow his family to find him, so he says hemp, which is the crop, and Harrison, which was the name of his master, the Harrison Hemp Farm, but he twisted and says his name is Hemp Harrison, and so that's how he becomes Hemp. All right, so I'm going to read a couple of passages. Luckily, all the passages in here are pretty short. Although my very first reading, I was reading, and my sister, I don't know if Leela heard this, she was there, was kind of standing right here, and I was reading the second passage, and I heard her say, "Wrap it up." Did you hear her? She's like, "Wrap it up." So every time I read now, I hear her voice in my head saying, "Wrap it up." So I'm going to keep it short. Although last week when I read, I tried to keep it short, and they wanted me to read more, so I just blame my sister for this quandary that I'm in. Okay. So when Hemp meets Madge, he begins to fall in love with her. I've been joking that this is a historical paranormal romance novel, and it's not altogether false. But it's not that juicy, but it fits. Okay, so sorry. It's still early, so every time I start to read something, I start thinking, maybe I should read something else. Okay, let's start with Hemp and Madge. After their trip to the prairie, he visited her on Sundays after church, talking more than he had ever talked to any woman. The words tumbled out, and even though he felt it was unmanly to talk so much, he could not stop. He talked mostly of himself, of Annie and life on the Harrison farm. He spoke of the camp where thousands of colored men and women sought sanctuary. And in return, the Tennessee woman lent him a precious gift, the most patient ear he had ever known. He learned the relief that comes from unleashed secrets, and he was grateful. He knew what drew him to her, but he was not sure at all of what she saw in him. They were as different as two people could be. She was untouched by slavery, and he had been a slave all his life. The woman was a mystery. As time went on, he began to think perhaps it was her freeborn status that made her a neutral audience of one. And he did not stop to think she might have a pain of her own. She had never known what he knew, the denial of everything that made him a man, the single unmitigated belief that a man was born to work like an animal. She kept something cooking on the stove for him, knowing he had been in church all morning and would be hungry when he arrived. Olga had Sundays off now, and Sadie stayed in her library most of the day, so it was easy for Madge to sneak food. On Sundays, Hemp ate whatever was on the widow's menu, and it was the best meal he had all week. They walked out to the carriage house and sat in chairs near the open doorway. She talked while he ate, and when he was finished, he talked while she rinsed their dishes in a tub of water. His constant stories about Annie inserted the pretense of innocence into the visits. But Madge was not fooled. When he didn't think she was watching, she caught him staring. The man came around for more than a hot meal. And he bought her things. He knew that ever since their trip out to the prairie, Madge had struggled to replenish her herb supply. Miraculously, Hemp got his hands on things that folks traveling from the South must have brought with them: snake root and collard greens stashed in traveling sacks, seeds tucked into hair. They spent those evenings together on the back steps of the widow's house or in the carriage house where Richard stabled the horse. When Hemp got steady work at a palace hotel, she was the first person he told. He was hired to clean, but after a few weeks, the management took note of his bulk and he was appointed hostler. The wages changed his heart, but the uniform changed the way he thought of himself. It dignified. In that suit, there was no mistaking the difference between a horse and a man. The hostlers were allowed a break to eat, and they sat cross-legged, their lunch in soggy bags, barely enough food to fuel them until their long shifts ended. Every one of them understood the good fortune of their positions, and they did what was asked without question, chewing leaves to stay on their feet, lifting trunks heavy enough to strain a back, carefully keeping their hands moving as they chatted, for the management was known to check on them unannounced. Hemp shared all of this with the Tennessee woman. I expect you could say the day I got to Chicago was the day of my birth, he told her, the thought revealing itself to him as he spoke. Eventually, he made his way up each of the back steps into the kitchen until he had seated himself at the table, their voices hushed but strong. Madge's kitchen was a doorway through which he could reach forward in time, and he did not think of the house as belonging to the widow. He thought of it as belonging to Madge, the room no less than Tennessee itself. That was no small feeling, because he knew how hard it was to claim something of your own out of somebody else's things. Okay. We'll read another little part. He cleared his throat. This is just a little bit forward, a conversation between them. He cleared his throat. So you say you like working for that widow? She take good care of me, I guess, she said. Better than them 3 women I live with down in Tennessee. 3 women? You mean your aunts, the sisters? All 3, not mine, though. It's something about your hands, ain't it? Something blessed, he said. Tell me something. How you give birth to something and then turn your back on it? I don't know, he said. I never give birth to nobody. All I asked for was one goodbye, a be safe, a God keep you. I didn't get nothing, not even a kiss my foot. What you say to them? You bless them? I don't understand family, she said. We supposed to help each other, not tear each other up. Even a bad family, a good one, he said. I ain't never done nothing to them women. Better than no family at all. Why I got to be born to them? Why can't I be born to a mama and a daddy? Sound like you need to make peace with some folks. She turned to him. What are you talking about? I'm saying this city is a dream, Madge. It ain't real. What's real then? For you, Tennessee. For me, Kentucky. I had a life before this one, even though I couldn't lay claim to it. Now all I got is this air biting at the back of my neck. You didn't have no life, Hemp. Everything you ever done while you was a slave was a wish. I ain't never known love, and neither has you. You wrong, Miss Madge, he said quietly. I known love and I known hate. I known a lot of things. She looked through the window. Her eyes felt tight and small, as if they wanted to swell and shut. Why couldn't it be easy? Why couldn't they just lay it down and leave it all behind? I'm sorry. Hey, look at me. He touched her chin. A squall of wind rocked the carriage. She leaned into him to steady herself, and when she looked back up at him, her lips touched his. She felt his warm breath on her face as he whispered, my wife. That woman is the past, she said. Not nearly. Then why we here? The voices of the sisters rose in her ears. Just remember, ain't no healing brew between your legs. Surely Hemp was different, even if he did have a wife lost somewhere in Kentucky. Even if he did do something terrible with a daughter that wasn't his own. All Madge's healing knowledge, all her gifts that seemed so powerful in the forest, failed to tell her what to do with this man. All her life she had been unlovable. He couldn't be any different, couldn't be. Something moved in the street, a twist of leaves shuddering. She turned to look at him, but now it was his turn to stare through the window on his side. She tucked a loose hair back into her braid, her hand shaking as the carriage glided slowly over the lakefront street. So that's Hemp and Madge. And I wanted to do one other little part. Let me see what else I have. So I wanted to read a little bit about Sadie. But I'm thinking I should go with Sadie and Madge together, because their relationship was one that I was really, really interested in. And so Sadie is also called the widow in the book. That's what the people call her. So this is a conversation between Sadie and Madge. A few days after Olga told the widow Madge knew how to doctor, the widow called the servant upstairs. Madge was not surprised by the summons. She had learned early on that they always wanted something: a hand to mix, 2 arms to lift, a fingertip pressed against a pulsing temple. To survive, she would just have to figure out what the widow wanted. Seated in front of the mirror, the widow pulled down a sleeve, exposing a bony shoulder. The skin had puckered into a lump, red in the center and ringed white at the edges. Madge touched it, and the widow winced. Madge pressed a hand into Sadie's neck and thought of all she'd been taught. There was clearly a boil, yes, but what else was there? To be a healer was to see the invisible. The sisters had, in their own admission, not been as good at it as their mother. The sisters had not allowed Madge to pronounce, had never acknowledged how she could feel things with her hands. Pronouncing was reserved for the eldest, but Madge could feel and sometimes hear things the sisters could not, like now, the soft wheeze of breath that signaled the beginnings of infection in the chest, a knot of gas in the stomach from last night's dinner. She pressed more deeply into the widow's neck. If she was going to be called on to heal the widow, she would need to feel it all. Something sparked, and she drew back her hand. "What are you doing? That spirit. What did you bring to put on my boil? That spirit man that talked to you, he hurt you? Are you going to talk it away, or are you going to put something on it?" Back in the kitchen, Madge's hands shook as she ground a palmful of thimbleweed root with oil until it was paste. There was something wrong with the way that spirit occupied Sadie's body. She didn't know what it was, but there was no way that dead man could do the widow any good. She wondered what she could say. The woman would never listen to her. She carried the bowl up to the widow's room and set it on the table. She scraped with a flat wooden handle and mashed it into the skin. When she had covered the boil in a thick green paste, she flattened a square of dry cloth over it and covered it with another dampened cloth. "Just sit and rest a while." "Where on earth did this thing come from? Is my dress too tight on my shoulders?" "I don't know." Madge picked up her bowl, then paused. "Could I ask you a question, Miss Walker?" "What is it?" "What you know about this spirit?" "Well, I believe in him, if that's what you're asking." "He say why he choose you?" "What? What do he want from you?" "You ask a lot of questions, don't you?" Sadie looked up at Madge. She had relaxed under the colored woman's touch, but then the woman had drawn her head back as if she'd been burned. What skills did this healing woman possess? She had been putting her hand in fire without getting burned. What else could she do? Sadie's contact with the spirit had newly opened her to mysteries, but she was not entirely comfortable with this newfound knowledge. "Well, he came to me about a year after his death. I suppose my needing him keeps him connected to this side. He wants to help." The widow rushed her words when she talked, and Madge did not always catch everything. "Ain't no good ever come from raising the dead," Madge said flatly. The widow did not answer, and Madge did not speak further out of fear she would anger the spirit. "You plan to tell me why you brung me here?" "To be my maid. Is that right?" "Yes." The widow's voice was high and reedy when she got excited, but in her calmer moments it was as gentle as a girl's. Madge suspected it was the kind of voice that would not deepen with age, unlike her own, which had already gained its force. "Since you asked, I'll tell you. I saw you putting your hand in that fire, and I thought you were a believer." "A believer in what?" "I thought you'd understand me." This the girl side of her, thought Madge. Most days I don't even understand my own self, let alone you. "Now I want to ask you something." She didn't say that, she thought that. "Now I want to ask you something." Madge held on to the bowl. "I done lived among women my whole life, and I still don't understand them. I want you to help me." Here it was, the truth. "Take their shawls, that sort of thing. I asked Olga, but she refused." "Deliver me." "I'm not asking, Madge, yea, though I walk." She could hear the lowing, the sound of a cow dragging its feet as it was roped into a death pen, neck pinched. And as sure as she recognized she was that cow, the lowing sound in her own head, she knew she would do it. Take capes in winter, store parasols in summer, cover the windows, pull back the portiere to reveal a portrait and a table covered in black cloth. She would do it out of fear the widow would turn her out if she didn't. Dead slaves had a tendency to come back hankering after unfinished business. Maybe white spirits were different, but Madge suspected many of those men who died on the battlefields had not left the earth singing hymns. "I don't know why you came to Chicago, Madge, but I suspect you ran away from something. I know you were free down there, but something happened, didn't it?" "Free freedom," Madge wanted to say. "You and I have something in common," said the widow. The woman was crazy. They had nothing in common. Madge placed her beliefs beside the widow's. To Madge, the spirits were in the flick of a flame. The ancestors inhabited whatever space they chose, the wrinkled bark of a tree, the bright anther of a flower, core of a cabbage head, a baby's wormy tongue. When a pig was slaughtered, every part from tail to snout was filled with spirit. The Lord King was inseparable from the spirit world. Why, the widow did not even pray. How could this woman talk to spirits without recognizing the holiness of everything, the carefully and ingeniously drawn earth? If the two were not one, then where did bowels of Christ leaves and Adam and Eve root come from? It was true that Madge believed in the widow's abilities, fully believed, as only a fellow person who respected life's mysteries could. What Madge did not agree with was the woman's understanding of it. I'll stop there.
Hi, Dolen.
Hi, Aaron.
One of the many things I really love about your work is how you develop so much sympathy for your characters. You know, you almost feel like they're friends, and you just feel so invested in their fates. And I'm wondering, how do you develop that? How do you make your characters so sympathetic to the reader?
So can I just say, this is my friend Aaron Hamburger, who is an awesome writer of his own and lives in D.C., new to D.C., so thank you for coming, Aaron. Look him up. Google him. I don't know what the technique is. I don't know if there's a technique for getting invested in the characters. I just know that I do. Like, even reading some of these parts, I get a little choked up. One of my blurbers, who was it? Valerie Martin, who wrote the book Property, one of my favorite books. Yes, I know. I love her. I call her my literary sister. If you've read Wench, you have to read Property. It's like sister books. And she wrote in the blurb. Let me see if it's on here. Yeah. She wrote, Dolen looks to the past with a calm gaze and a sympathetic heart. And when I read that, you know, usually people write things and you try not to believe it about yourself. But that blurb I love, like, because I do feel like, and I should talk to you, Aaron, I do feel like I look back really sympathetically. Like you know, everybody, I just look back with such sympathy for what they must have gone through and how difficult it was, you know. I was down in, let me see, I guess it's like, where is the George Mason plantation? Y'all know what I'm talking about? It's like 50 miles south of here in Virginia. And I saw it, they invited me to come down there and give a talk. And I told my husband, I was pregnant at the time, and when I drove up, it was like, I was like on a movie set, because it looks just like the plantation of your nightmares, right? Like, it is beautiful. It's got these big trees lining the, you know, gravel road that goes all the way down to the house. And I literally like pulled over and kind of like, you know, said a prayer. You know, I felt the spirits of those places. So anyway, so we're walking through, at the end of my talk, there was a young docent there who was so lovely, asked me if I wanted a tour of the home, and I said, sure. And when we go into the dining room, and this is still answering your question, Aaron, there was a picture of Mason's first wife, who had given birth to the majority of his children. And it's this big, beautiful portrait, and she's talking about her, and, you know, these sort of adoring terms. She says, yeah, you know, so she has, and she says, and then she died, you know, and she was very young. And I went, oh my God, that's terrible. You know, like, the only thing I could think was she had all these children and then died. You know, and I just have always had a lot of compassion for what white women on plantations went through. And then she says, but it's okay, because, you know, she lived this fabulous, you know, in this fabulous house, and, you know, she got to do this and that, and I was just like, yeah, but that's just so terrible. You know, so that's kind of just how I view history. Like, I looked at that portrait and I saw like a tragic figure, you know, and that's kind of, I don't glorify, or, you know, I don't have any illusions about how difficult it was to live back then for anyone. So I really like that Valerie Martin thing. Yeah.
Is there next question? Okay, I'm coming up to the front. As fast as I can.
Hey, Dolen.
Hi, Susan. Another DC author, Susan Shreve. Thank you.
And on the subject of DC, I just wanted to say what an amazing review and how it caught both the language, the beautiful language, and your keen ear for dialogue and these characters.
Thank you.
So,
I appreciate it. I take that very to heart coming from you. I really wanted to slow down a little bit with this one. This one, you know, Winch was based on a scandal, and it's sexy. It's a sort of sexy title. It's a sexy topic. I mean, you know, in its own tragic way. You know, I say that not literally sexy, but you know, it had a certain appeal. The hook of that book, and this novel is really more of a meditation on our survival as a nation, and so I was really pleased with that review because I felt that I felt like the reviewer got it. You know, that's what you can only hope for when you get reviewed, is that they get it. And then if they get it and then they still don't like it, then you're a little bit okay with that because you know that they understood it. So I was really pleased by that. Oh, sorry, I can't. Hi, Odessa.
How are you?
I'm good.
I have a question for you. You said that you wanted to put Lizzie to rest for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Will she be resurrected?
Never say never.
Okay.
That is the first rule of writing, and I think, yeah, we'll see.
Okay.
I hate to answer that because you never know what's going to happen when I go back in my cave.
Okay.
You want me to wake her up?
Yes, wake her up. I think we want to see her resurrected.
Yeah.
Hi, I think I heard you say, or in an interview about Winch, the other book, that one of the things that got you interested in that story was the Hemings family story in Monticello. Mm-hmm. Is that true?
Yes.
Yeah. And I'm just wondering, when I read Winch, I thought, well, any one of these women in Winch could have been Sally Hemings, because we don't know that much about her. But I'm wondering if you're ever going to be attracted to that story to deal with it directly.
Well, you know, I think the historian Annette Gordon Reed has really done that beautifully as a historian. I don't know what I could add, but and you know, and then there's been a film about it, etc. But I was intrigued by that. I was intrigued by Sally's story about when I read Gordon Reed's book about, you know, her contention that they had an arrangement, and because I was really interested in the notion of consent in those relationships, and so I do still think about I still think about her, and I think about women like her sometimes. Yeah.
Coming forward. I'm just going to go to the closest right here.
Okay.
Hi, Dolen.
Hi.
I feel like I learn something every time I read one of your books or your short stories or even your other papers. And this time, I have to say, I learned something about medicinal lore, right, plants, the fact that people could actually get their papers in Kentucky by signing up for the war, spiritualism, and that time in history and when spiritualism was so big. How is it that you pull together all of this research and this information and you weave it so beautifully into a story? I sort of feel like you sneak up on me and teach me something that I wouldn't, you know, that I enjoy learning and only realize after I finish the book that I've learned something new and interesting.
Thank you for saying that. That's like the best compliment you can give a historical author or historical fiction writer, because, I mean, I'm not trying to teach anyone anything. What I do when I research is I'm trying to get a sense of the time. You know, I'm trying, I can't, you know, someone asked me, I was on a panel recently, and someone asked me if, how do I get into the mind of a character from history? And I said, you know, I don't really try to get in a character's mind as much as I try to get in their bodies, which sounds weird because in fiction you're speaking their thoughts, but I really want to know what it felt like to wake up in the morning. Was it cold? Was it, you know, and so once I had done enough research, like when I first started writing, I hadn't done enough research. I had to go back and read more. And then I remember the day I was sitting in the library and I looked up, and it was there. Like I could taste the dirt in my mouth. I smelled how terrible it smelled on those streets. They had a terrible sewage system. I heard people calling from atop the bill. I was there. And I would imagine that historians feel this way. A friend of mine, her husband is a Russian historian, and she said every now and then she'll interrupt him in his study and he'll say, what? I was in 1917 just now, you know. and I that's what I'm trying to do as a writer. I'm trying to get there. And once I can get there, I can begin to tell the story. I know, you know, what's happening. I was in Chicago. I was in the archives, and as I said, the whole city burned down in 1871, so it's very little that survived. And so in this particular archive, I asked the archivist to bring me everything they had prior to 1871. So they came out with the boxes. There were about 7 of them. And they put them on the table. And so I went through them. I was just going through, you never know what you're looking for. So the very last box, I take out a diary, and it was the only thing in the box. And I start reading. It was late. They were about to close. I started reading it. And the first page said, you know, woke up this morning. It was so cold. You know, the next page, you know, I woke up this morning. I put some wood on the fire because I was just so cold. The third page is like, it was pretty cold today. And I was like, this diary's not about anything. And I closed it up. I put it back in the box, and I ended for the night. And when I got back to my hotel later that night, I woke up and I said, that's it. It was cold, you know? And it wasn't cold in the sense even that we think of it today, because we have our heat and we have our cars that we get in and we have this, that, and the rest. You are always in a constant state of managing your comfort. And that changed my entire book, because that also, the winter also became a metaphor for people, another metaphor for how people survived. And I remember I was in a Jackson Hole, Wyoming hotel one time, and I opened the drawer thinking it was not going to be anything there but a Bible, and there was like a little guidebook to like the history of Wyoming. And I opened it, and you know, one of the things it was talking about was how, you know, people who live there take great pride in the fact that, or people who have always lived there, you know, for generations, take great pride in the fact that they can survive that winter, you know, and it is a testament to character, right? And so I remembered that, and so you can be in the archive and you just don't know what it's going to be, but then all of a sudden I knew that, you know, it's always cold. That's why, you know, everybody would sort of get in one room and just have the heater going in that one room, because, you know, the idea of heating an entire house, you know, you had to be pretty wealthy. I mean, Sadie's wealthy, but still, you know, the houses were drafty, you know, so you just never know. And I don't really research to try to put anything in there. I'm just researching to get a feel. And then sometimes what you'll see in my books are the things that kind of started to become obsessions, and then I just couldn't keep them out, like the hemp stuff. Like, how do you crop hemp? Like, you know, I have probably more detail in the book about that should be. But I just was so fascinated by that, yeah.
When I read the book, The Wench, when the masters took the ladies on vacation, I was very happy, but then I got so sad because it really wasn't a vacation for them. And they still couldn't be happy about being away because they still had to worry about their children while they were away. How were you able to just, you showed in the book the happiness about them, in the sense that they were happy that they were getting away from the plantation and they were going away, but they were still in captivity and the sadness came in. And I just want to thank you for the way you wrote that, because it changed my heart about being happy for them because they were getting away when they really weren't away.
Right. I mean, you know, it must have been so odd, because one of the things that I learned when I was in graduate school and studying this stuff was how isolating those plantations were, and how that was part of how they controlled you, was to isolate you from anyone outside. And only the very special few were given passes to be able to either go to another plantation or to go into town. And these women have the biggest pass of all, which is to go out of the state and to go into free territory. And I was just like, what? This was the whole thing. I mean, because I've heard that there were similar places in South Carolina. That's the only place I've heard where there were similar places where the planters would go up from, I don't know, Charleston or wherever they were, to get out of the heat and you know, vacation and hunt, and they would take their slave mistresses with them. But that's not as interesting to me, because we all know what South Carolina was about. I was more interested in the fact that it was Ohio, a free state, a place that is known for its abolitionist activity, and they crossed that river that so many people had died trying to cross. And so, yeah, it was very intriguing to me why they would go up there, and why wouldn't they try to run? Why would they go back, you know? But your emotional response to the book, I mean, honestly, I didn't anticipate that, but I got a lot of emotional response to that book. It touched some kind of nerve, particularly in women. I don't know why, but I thank you for that. That's the reason I write, is to get that feedback.
Hi, Dolen.
Hi,
It's
Michelle.
How are
Yes,
you?
I'm good. How are you?
Okay. You had a line in Balm, Kiss My Foot, and I know that's real West African, particularly Liberian. Yeah, so was it purposeful?
No.
Okay, yeah.
My mother says that all the time. Some of this stuff is like, you know, people say, how did you learn Southern dialect? I'm like, my grandparents. And, you know, some of it's like, you know, using what they, and my mother would say, she didn't say hi, she didn't say kiss my foot. You know, that's like, she's always said that. And there's another, and I just heard my daddy say it just last week. There's another scene when Hemp arrives at Camp Nelson, and he sees black soldiers drilling, you know, like marching drilling. He says, and he looks out over the camp, which is on this sort of beautiful, expansive land. He says, my land. And my daddy says that all the time, my land. But when Hemp says it, it becomes a double entendre, because he's talking about America as his land, you know. But it was something I just kind of stole from my daddy. And he just said it again last week. But, you know, he says it to mean like, I guess, OMG. Yeah, it's like the old man's version of like, oh my God, you know, my land, you know. But, you know, and I'm hoping that's what he's saying, because there were some things we used to say when we were little, and I didn't, like, we used to say golly, and I never knew that was golly until I got older. I didn't know what that was. I was just like, we would say, like, golly. You remember that? And then I got older, and I learned that was, I'm like, we were saying golly. Wow, we were country. Yeah, we were some country people, let me tell you.
Okay, I've got one question here, and then after that, maybe two more.
Okay. I'll try to be brief.
I'm interested in how the characters, Madge and Sadie, came to you.
How did they come to me? Well, with Sadie, after I read Drew Faust's book, which talked a little bit about spiritualism, I was interested in this whole, and then I heard, you know, that Abraham Lincoln's wife, Mary Todd Lincoln, had been very much into spiritualists and contacting the dead. And I was interested in that, you know. And it's interesting because early, when I first started to draft Sadie, I was talking to someone about her, and they said, well, you know, all the spiritualists were frauds, right? And I'm like, how do you know they were frauds? Are you sure? We never know. That's why I don't mess with psychics, because you never know if it's a real one or not. So I thought, you know, there was a possibility, and I knew, I felt, and I could have been wrong, but I felt like my readers wanted me to be clear whether or not she was fraudulent or genuine. And I decided to make her genuinely gifted. And so she just emerged from that, and she's loosely based on Cora Hatch, who was a very, very famous spiritualist at the time. And she mentions her in the book, and you probably will miss it. My editor just asked me, at lunch a couple of weeks ago, if she was based on someone. She said, is she based on, I have to ask her why she asked me that, why she was thinking that. But she asked me that, and I said, we actually, yeah, loosely inspired by Cora Hatch, who I'd read a lot about, who traveled a lot during that time. And, because these women had male spirits speaking through them, it gave them license to say things that women didn't normally say. And it also gave them a license to speak in ways that women didn't normally speak, in terms of sort of being on stage, being at a pulpit, and I play a lot with that kind of power that Sadie feels traveling. They're earning a wage. People became very frightened of some of the women at one time because they said that the women weren't going to marry and that they were going to make all of the young women, they were going to corrupt them in some way with their sort of newfangled ideas about womanhood. I was loving that, and I was like, and the thing about Sadie is, I don't want to give anything away in the book, but she, she did not want to marry. She wants from the very beginning to work. She wants to work. And so her options are limited. Madge, I started with Madge thinking about the sisters. When I was in Memphis, my mom and her sisters were there, and it was loosely based on them and their bond. And, every now and then you'll be with my mom and her sisters, and they'll be joking, and I'll say, yeah, Aunt Carol, tell Mama. And she'll say, I'm not telling her that. As soon as you think that you're in the circle, they close. And you're reminded that their bond is indestructible, And they'll be teasing each other about their kids and stuff, and your kid, look at that car your kid drives. And then you say, yeah, look at that car. And they look at you like, wait a minute, who are you? Don't talk about my sister's kids. And so I've always loved being around my mom and her sisters. I do. They are just beautiful, exceptional women. And I took that bond and began to sketch these sisters, and Madge sort of was me. But I've never felt like the bond was such that I was rejected, but for Madge, the bond is so strong that she's rejected. And I also played around with elder culture in the South, which is very much about young people, especially traditionally. It's changing a little bit now with the younger generation, but for my parents, and Leela can attest to this, children were to be seen and not heard. You didn't really participate in grown-up conversations. You knew when to kind of close your mouth. You can never, no matter how many degrees you get, no matter how smart you become, you can never know anything more than they know. The pediatrician said, I don't care what that pediatrician said. You put some sugar and some water in that baby's bottle. It's true, right? And, right? It's so true. And this being video, my mom's going to kill me. But it is true. I know we have one more question, but, that's how I came with the characters, honestly. It was kind of organic. And Madge came out of that, and then everybody kind of evolved. Thank you for asking that.
We may have 2.5, actually.
Hi, Dolen. First of all, congrats on the Washington Post review. That's amazing.
Thank you.
Two things. When I was reading Wench, there are some books that when I read them, I'm actually seeing the movie. I'm actually seeing the characters. And so I'm just curious, is there a movie coming? That's one. And the second is, when did you know that you wanted to write historical fiction?
So you asked me, is there a movie coming with Wench?
Yeah.
Wench, Wench is still doing its work in the world. That's what I can say. It was optioned, the option expired. Somebody texted me last night and said that in the July, they sent me a little picture, in the July issue of In Style magazine, which is actually one of my favorite magazines, I'm kind of shocked. They interviewed Octavia Spencer, who starred in The Help, and they asked her what was on her nightstand, and she said Wench by Dolen Perkins-Valdez, and that's in the July issue. I know. So I was like, Hollywood, Hollywood. I don't know. That's kind of out of my hands. I just, you know, books have a life. They live their life independent of the author, and so I'm just, whatever happens with her, as long as she's treated right. And then in terms of historical fiction, I just, I don't know if I ever set out to write historical fiction. I just follow my nose. And then actually, you know, I didn't think I was going to write another historical fiction novel, but with this one, I just ended up back in the library, and I started thinking about things I had encountered on my tour. I don't know. Maybe the next one won't be. I don't know what I'm going to do. Who knows?
Hi, Dolen.
Hi, darling. This is my classmate from, you know where?
Okay.
College.
All right. I was actually just going to ask you if you've been drawn to modern day, writing about modern day characters.
Have I been drawn to writing about modern day characters ever? And writing more? Maybe. I don't know, maybe. An author told me, Liz Hand, who I work with in Maine, told me, you know, early in her career, she had developed a niche writing in a particular area. She's a fantasy writer. And then she, you know, decided to venture out and try something new. And she said, you know, if I had it to do all over again, Dolen, I would have kind of stuck in my niche a little bit longer. So I don't know, like there's a part of me that's like, there's still some more historical stories to be told. Then there's another part of me that's like, who knows what I might see on TV one day that'll get me to my computer, you know.
Hi, Dolen.
Hi.
So I'm curious why you decided to do Chicago. And you took us out of the South mostly, and we're in Chi-Town.
That's right. You know, like I said, you know, Chicago's always had a weird foothold in my imagination. And, you know, being from Memphis, my mother lived in Chicago for a while. Her brothers and sisters lived there. There's a direct conduit between Memphis and Chicago. And, you know, I thought it would be a really good place to think about the Civil War that wasn't a battleground. Outside, I did not want to touch the raw nerve of the Civil War so much as, not touch it, but kind of massage it, you know, like, I think it's time for us, in terms of talking about the Civil War, it's time for us to talk about what we have, what brings us together rather than what divides us. I mean, it's just odd that it's still so divisive when we talk about that. You know, I don't understand it. I don't understand why the country is still experiencing the racial strife that I just don't understand it. Like, it's like, really? Are we really looking at this all over again, you know, in 2015? I mean, I'm all about healing. And that was what I was trying to do with this book. I'm really ready for us to, like, you know, she says in the passage that I read, why can't we just lay it down? Why is it so hard to just lay it down? Okay, is this the last one? Or are we done?
Well, we had our second and a half.
We did, oh, okay.
How about if you ask the question, you're coming through the signing line?
Okay.
Is that okay? Okay. And we're gonna have a signing line. We'll have signing right here, and then we'll just make the line coming straight back toward the stage and then around the room. And thank everyone for coming.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.